Okay, do you want to start off? Or?
Glad to. We are
We're on, so we can.
With Dr. Al Muth at the Deep Canyon Research Center, together with Colin Barrows, and I'm Cheryl McKinley with Friends of the Desert Mountains. And we wanted to talk to Al about his long career here and details and overview of the research station and the fringe toed lizard and any number of topics. So we're just going to get started with saying thanks for having us your beautiful front yard.
Not a bad piece of real estate, I'd say.
Yeah. How many acres is it, by the way?
UC owns 6,223 acres and change.
And part of that, so there's like a big square here.
Well, it's pieced together as section parcels.
Yeah.
But in broad brush, it's from the golf course over Sheep Mountain behind us, more or less up to Highway 74 and over the hill there, starting down to La Quinta. We do have an isolated parcel that touches corners with a BLM parcel, our parcel, BLM. And for 20 plus years, I've had a land exchange just trying to sort that out, swap them.
Yeah.
And
do you think you're going to get there in the next month and a half? Or?
Not during my tenure.
Yeah.
Well,
pressure's off.
I make it a point to jab whoever the manager is with a sharp elbow just about every chance I get. It hasn't worked. So. But anyway, right now the wilderness boundary comes down, goes up around our section. Bear Creek Trail goes across our property.
Right.
And we cannot allow that to be open to public access for a number of liability reasons and such. And all that can be straightened out. I've even offered to pay to have it done.
Yeah.
But the Bureau has its ways.
Yeah.
Infinite wisdom.
The Bureau has its ways.
Isn't there another little chunk of squares up in Pinyon Crest area?
Yeah. In Pinyon, we have 3/4 of a section. And we manage 2/3 of that property. There's 1/4 section that's operated as the geophysical lab out of UC San Diego.
So actually you don't commute there or have any projects out of this research station that also occur up there?
We have long-term ongoing projects up there, one of which is an infrasound listening station that's part of the United Nations nuclear test ban treaty. Any atmospheric nuclear test has a certain signature. There's a series of these stations around the world that, by triangulation, they can figure out where the blast was and those sorts of things. But it's also used to hear things like space junk coming back into the atmosphere, earthquakes, tsunamis. There's an awful lot that we can't hear, but the instrumentation can pick up.
Really? Interesting.
And we also have some long-term projects looking at the diversity of rodents and relative abundance over long time periods. So it's used. We should have a presence up there, but we don't. It should be fenced, but it isn't. And some Pinyonites take certain liberties, cutting firewood and stuff like that.
That's Pinyonites want to do, yeah.
Yes. We should have a presence 24/7, but we don't.
Yeah.
That's where I think the next round of development and focus of attention should go is up to that upper site. What you don't see here is a great deal of frustration for, in 2011, I got $1.2 million in funding to put in an education building fix that awful road,
Mhm.
some education, some campground improvements. And thus far have been thoroughly stymied and frustrated by architects and engineers on campus. My first time in 35 years that I did not get support from the campus. So that's a sore point. But anyway, once that's done, the lower site will have pretty much everything it needs to bring this station up to today's contemporary standards. 60 years, we've never had an indoor education facility. I think we need that.
Yeah.
Our electronic infrastructure is good. We have internet access over a goodly portion of the floodplain, and at our campground, which is 1 3/4 miles off in that direction. And so in terms of connectivity to the outside world and such, we're in pretty good shape.
Is it too sore a point to ask what happened with the lack of funding or the lack of?
It wasn't a lack of funding.
Uh-huh.
It's UC bureaucracy. It's, in the last 4 years, there have been 3 complete changes of leadership, architects and engineers, and 2 total reorganizations of physical plant and architects and engineers within the vice chancellor structure of administration at UC Riverside. So it is inexcusable to drag a project out this long. We've asked for 2 extensions on the money this is Proposition 84. The funds are administered by Wildlife Conservation Board. And they've let it be known that there will be no more extensions. And the money runs out in December of 2018, December 31st. Right now, the optimistic projections are to initiate construction in August 2017 and have it done and ready for acceptance by the university by August of 2018. Given the history of this project, we'll see.
We'll be up
I'm
against
sorry. I'm sorry. to hear that.
But the Mayhew building, our main lodging for researchers, we built that in 94. We got that done in 6 months.
Yeah.
We got the money, we got an architect from architects and engineers on campus. Bang, we did it. Something's changed.
Well, the Mayhew building houses how many?
14.
Wow. What does a person need to go through to apply and be granted a place to stay here?
There's a formal system, Reserve Administration and Management System. I had to come up with a good acronym, so it's RAMS.
Okay.
So there's an online application. First thing you do is submit a research application. I review that, not to say whether or not it's good science or bad science. I've seen a lot of both. But just to make certain that what is proposed can be done here, that what they're proposing to work on occurs in enough abundance that it would be useful. See that what they're proposing is compliant with our policies and regulations. For instance, we do not allow any research that will have a permanent perturbation on the floodplain. You're not going to come in and thin grease and bushes. You're not going to come in and do a great deal of surface disturbance. We can find places for you to do that. That'll be developed. We've done that over the years. So once we determine that everything is fine, you will not have a lasting impact on the research area. Then I'll tell them that their research application was approved. And then There's a next step is to submit a reservation application. I look at that, schedule the housing and those sorts of things. And what we do is provide the facilities, some logistic support in the protected research area for user-initiated research and teaching. We have our own research project. Mark Fisher, a station biologist, we've worked together on fringe-toed lizards for 34 years. Yeah, but the users, the researchers, initiate their own projects, get their own funding. We just provide the place and means that they can do it.
Right.
So that's the process.
And it's well used, it's occupied all the time, great demand for it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Things slow down in the summer, but it's not empty. There's usually one or two people here throughout the summer. I mean, long-term individuals here for the summer. And then we'll get short-term people coming in overnight, 2-3 day visits, those sorts of things. And our user base is made up of people from any legitimate educational or research institution. It's not just University of California. About half of our use does come from one the UC campuses. The other half comes from all over the U.S. and the world. Our next international visitor is coming in from Japan. That'll be his 5th visit to the station.
I'm gonna say I think I've met him before. Is it Japanese?
Takashi.
Yeah. And what's his research on?
Microbiology, soil, root soil, fungal hyphae relationships, and right now he's interested in Celia and creosote. As I recall. There's been an overall change in focus of our research within the last 5 to 6 years. Before it used to be on sort of bigger things that you could see above ground, whether it was some sort of plant taxonomy or lizard behavior, bighorn sheep, foraging, that sort of stuff. Now we have a number of projects that are really interested in what you can't see, what goes on underground, competitive relationships at the root level between plants, microbiological metabolism, gas emissions from the soil, all those sorts of things. There's a lot of focus on that now.
Do you think that's because of that's kind of where the research is pointing people, or is it the equipment is now available in a way that wasn't before, or
All of the above.
all the above?
The equipment is far more sensitive and precise than it used to be. It's also smaller,
Cheaper, I'm assuming. All that.
cheaper. Plus some of the things that people are interested in. What occurs in this scoop of sand that you just got out. Today you can just run that through a genomic sequencer, pick out bits and pieces of DNA that's in there and figure out what occurs in there. You've never seen it, but you're pretty confident of what's in there. We have nematode project that they do find the nematodes. Nematodes are small roundworms. They're a millimeter long, would be a huge one, but they're everywhere, and they're extraordinarily abundant and good at what they do. You can dry them out. They dry up. They last for decades. Put a little water on them, boom, they come back to life. And tardy water bears
Water bears.
do the same thing, but they're hard to find. But if you can sequence with the DNA that you find, you figure out what's there.
Mhm.
Plus, we get the same sorts of things with the bacteria, the fungus around the soil roots, and that sort of stuff. So that and climate change.
Mhm.
Besides the meteorological stuff that everybody looks at and wants to analyze, there's a lot of concern about what is the changing soil
Mhm.
biota. And plants, if you can move a plant from point A to point B, it's not going to do well in point B unless you bring along everything that makes it possible for it to thrive and extract nutrients from the soil and those sorts of things.
Mhm.
So I think all those factors led to the change.
So that gets it. One of the things I wanted to ask about. So you came to the research station in what year?
January 1st, 1982.
1982. So and we'll get back to that a little bit, but I wanted to sort of get a feeling for how, like, what kind of research projects have gone on and how it's changed over time. So it sounds like there's been a change in the last 5 years with any changes in the last 25 years before that? Or we wanted to do that?
Changes that have come gradually.
Yeah.
As I said, the initial research focus when I got here was on larger animals, sort of fundamental physiological ecology and behavioral ecology.
Mm-hmm.
Kangaroo rat studies that focused on tracking kangaroo rats,
Mm-hmm.
tracking them longitudinally, as they age and population demographics and such. We had and have a lot of interest in annual plant phenology.
Mm-hmm.
They still haven't figured it out. No 2 years are the same, and about the time the botanists, plant ecologists think they might understand the system, it changes.
Yeah.
One of the folks who was out here was Jack Burke at Cal State Fullerton. 5-6 years he did his annual plant surveys and such. And one day he said the most abundant plant on the floodplain seems to be Plantago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Go out and try to find a Plantago today.
Yeah, I don't know what
There's-
Plantago is.
That's the woolly plantain or desert plantain.
Okay.
This past spring, I fully expected to see a fair amount of Plantago.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't there?
Huh.
Scattered here and there.
Right.
But this spring, the Camasonia
Right. It's been the year of
just
brown eyes.
exploded.
Yeah.
Every plant out here has a strategy to the annual plants to deal with these variable years. They hedge their bets. You toss out your seed. You don't want it all to come up at the same time. Some of them germinate. They make it or they don't. Next year, a few more come up. They make it or they don't. Then you get a year like this past spring, and you'd be hard pressed to convince me that there's more Camasonia seed out there. It was there in its billions.
Yeah.
So, those are the kinds of changes we see. That was, like I said, the bigger scale things when I first got here. There was a lot of work done on rattlesnakes, rattlesnake tracking, just to figure out where do they go in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
We back in the early '90s, we didn't know if they denned here or not.
Mm-hmm.
They den in cooler climates. David Greenberg from UC Santa Barbara tracked rattlesnakes for 4 years. And lo and behold, they spend the winter and brumate, hibernate, individually in the rocky hillsides. That's both speckled rattlesnakes rattlesnakes and red rattlesnakes. And you know what? A year later, you go back and they're within a meter of where they were the year before. But during the rest of the year, they're scattered out. They go over the floodplain. Their home range is about a mile in diameter. When your head's that high off the ground, how do you navigate? You get behind a small rock and you can't see anything. They find their way back every fall. And there's a lot of indication that if you find them up there under my deck one year, in a 2-week period or so the following year, they're going to be back up there. So they seem to make these circuits and they wind up where they started. So and that's the kind of stuff that we started out with.
And you have so many more answers than you had before.
So more questions. Answer one, you raise a dozen more.
It seems to me that the answers keep getting from large to to finer, small, molecular, kind of cellular things that are going on in the creatures, as opposed to that we have to look closer.
Yes and no. Things do tend to scale down.
Yeah.
Well, how does the animal do that? Then you do the physiology of the animal and such. And then if you're getting down to the soil level, you'll figure out, the hyphae have to be there with the roots to get the nutrient transfers and the water transfers and all that. But then you sort of step back and say, well, does this occur on a broader level? So let's go look at it up in the conifers. Let's go look at it in the chaparral and see if there's some general patterns. So it goes up and down. It's sort of a sine wave.
So let's return a little bit to sort of the history of the station, because I always think about there's this huge, almost untouched, relatively untouched chunk of desert in here, and it's really easy when you're down on 111 to just not put this sort of gap in the human occupation of the valley into your mind. It's really easy to not know that it's even possible for it to be here. So back at the original owner of the property was
Philip L. Boyd.
And who was he and what time are we talking about?
Boyd was from Indianapolis, and he moved here in 1920. He had tuberculosis, and in those days you moved to a warm, dry climate. You either got better or you didn't. He did pretty doggone good. He thrived. And in 1921, I think, his wife, Dorothy Norman Boyd, joined him in Palm Springs. And he got interested in politics. He's the first mayor of Palm Springs. He began to, he was active in real estate, banking, and agriculture as well as politics. He bought up a bunch of worthless desert land that's now big portions of Palm Springs and Indian Wells and Rancho Mirage. As a matter of fact, the old cottage right next door started out as a tack room on his ranch where the Gene Autry Hotel, I think it's the Da Vinci Hotel, sits, something like that, Palm Springs. He moved it to his Deep Canyon Ranch in the early 60s and expanded it. That Deep Canyon Ranch is just on the north side of Living Desert. Today you call that the Vintage Club. So he made a number of, which seemed probably at the time foolish investments in desert real estate, and he did quite well. He, as I said, was also successful in banking. I forget what the bank was, but he brought in one of the big branches into Palm Springs, his first one. He served in the Assembly, California State Assembly, 46 to 48, I think. And while he was in the Assembly, he introduced the legislation that brought the new UC campus to Riverside. In 1954, the campus opened. While all that is happening, Boyd is still active in the desert. He was one of the founders of the Palm Springs Desert Museum, now called the Palm Springs Art Museum. And in 1952, I think it was, he secured a lease on some land from the Water District that became the Palm Springs Desert Museum Wildlife Sanctuary. The new campus comes, by the way, you call that Living Desert today. The new campus comes to Riverside. The new faculty comes in. Boyd convinces the faculty that they want to come out and work at the sanctuary and that they should set up various kinds of experiments. And of course, immediately, the problem arises that public access and research are not compatible. We're good primates. We like shiny objects, and you walk along. Oh, what's that over there? You walk over, you walk through a research site. You can really mess it up just walking through it. So after a number of incidents, faculty got together with Boyd at the sanctuary one day and were trying to convince him that, this just isn't going to work. And Bill Mayhew was one of the founding faculty and was there at that meeting. And Boyd was growing more and more agitated and frustration. I was saying, we're just not going to be able to work here. And to hear Mayhew tell the story, Boyd gives this big, grand, sweeping gesture. He says, well, I've got some land back there. You want to go see it? That's how we started. Let's see, 56. By 58, he donated several sections of land that he owned up here. And that's how the research station started. Over the years, he continued to donate bits and pieces of land when he was able to buy it from Bureau of Land Management. In those days, you could. And he kept an active interest in the reserve up until his death in 1989.
So, it's not every land developer who came out to the desert had this interest in not just conserving it, but also learning things about it and wanting to get an idea of what made him tick. Or
I don't know. Looking back, an old man, and you think about these things. I wish I'd got to know Boyd better. I would have asked him that very question. All I know is he truly loved the desert. And he started Living Desert.
Yeah.
That originally started out to be a local conservation-oriented facility. It's changed over the years. I understand they need the gate and all the things they do now. But it's not the way it originally started. And he really was interested in the research that the new faculty were doing. And even after it was here, when I was here as a grad student, I did my PhD research here at the station. I would encounter him coming up the road, and you always ask, how's the research going? And, what are you doing? Can you do anything? And so he really did have a love for the desert, whether it had anything to do with his tuberculosis, and thriving and surviving, or just, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you could make an inference there, I guess. Maybe.
Inference.
Yeah.
Now, you spoke about doing your PhD work here. What was that in?
Actually, I worked on desert iguanas, and I was at the University of Wisconsin in a lab that was a thing called biophysical ecology.
Okay.
It's basically heat and mass transfer relationships in biological systems. And what I was interested in is reproduction in desert iguanas. They lay an egg that has a soft shell. It doesn't have a concarious shell like a chicken egg. It loses water about as fast as a sponge if you'd set it out here on the table. Now, why on earth would a lizard that lives in one of the hottest, driest parts of North America, hottest, driest parts of the world, actually, lay an egg like that? Well, if you lose water fast, you can take up water fast. So if that's the case, and what are those physiological tolerances that the egg has, and how do those change over the incubation period of the egg? In order to sort some of that stuff out, we need to find the eggs. To this day, we don't know where they lay their eggs. Right? The few desert lizard nests that have been found have been serendipitous. And, back in those days, I did a lot of computer modeling and things of that nature. I can tell you exactly where they got to be. I have no idea how the female finds it. The spaces between the shrubs are warmer and wetter than they are under the shrubs. Under the shrubs, creosote sucks the soil dry. There's no way you're going to get anything under there. But out in those open places, which you wouldn't think.
Right, you think it'd be
the other way around.
Yeah.
But, we have enough soil data and measurements that that's where the eggs have to be laid. They have to be laid at a depth so that during the 6 to 8 weeks the eggs are in the ground, it doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too dry.
Wow.
So I can tell you, the depth they got to be at, when they've got to be laid. How's the female find it? She digs a hole, lays her eggs, walks away. There's a lot of desert iguanas out there. She must know something.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that I was interested in. And I stayed here for 3 years of field work. And I worked down actually, what would be the south side of Living Desert. I had my study plots down there. And I left here on September 8th, I think, 1976. Hurricane Kathleen came through. And September 10th, I think. Took out my study site. It was in the Whitewater River. All my lizards, my marked lizards, and all that was gone. So that ended my field work and shifted most of it to finishing up in the lab, looking at water potentials and stuff like that.
So, did you come to the desert originally for that, or have you been here at all before? Or?
No, I'd been here before. I got my bachelor's degree at Cal State Fullerton. And my undergraduate advisor, a guy named Byard Bradstrom, he's a herpetologist. He got me interested in reptiles and amphibians. I went to the Navy. After the Navy, I went back to Cal State Fullerton. And casting about for a master's project, I got interested in zebra-tailed lizards. So I started coming up to Thousand Palms Canyon, back in easily accessible in those days. And worked on zebra-tailed lizards, thermoregulation, postural control of body temperatures, those sorts of things. So that began starting in 69, I probably started coming out in earnest working out here. And I went to Wisconsin in 72, '73, I think I came out, collected animals. I had a lizard colony in Wisconsin. Desert
Desert
iguanas.
ones, really?
The only desert iguana colony the world's ever had. A small colony.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finished up in Wisconsin, went to University of Colorado State University in Fort Collins for a postdoc. I was there for a year, and I got a phone call from another guy who worked on reptiles out here, Bill Muth. He said, Jan Zabriskie, my predecessor, is retiring. I said, oh, really? I got on the phone and called Mayhew. So I just heard this. I don't want to seem like a vulture, but I'm interested in the job. And I said, don't worry, I'll do the third PhD that's called me this morning. So that's how that all came about.
So I'm going to check on the camera just to make sure we're all still going and talk about Bill Mayhew while I do that.
Bill Mayhew was one of those true American hero stories. He was born in the Central Valley. He went to, I think, a community college for a couple of years, got bored, and joined the Army Air Corps. Wasn't the Air Force in those days. They trained him as a turret gunner. And that's the bubble that hangs out on the bottom. His squadron was on a troop ship going to Australia. They left Pearl Harbor on December 5th. And then the attack came, and the squadron wound up in Darwin, Australia. Half his unit shipped out on one of the carriers that went down at the Battle of Coral City. Bill was his half of the unit, then shipped to India. He flew missions over the Himalayas to bomb Japanese positions in China. From there, the units went to North Africa. He was active in campaigns in Libya and then in Italy. His planes were shot down 3 times. He got a Purple Heart, but he was never seriously injured. Came back heavily decorated. His bomber group was the most decorated bomber group in the Second World War. And then he went back to Berkeley, finished his PhD, got a postdoc at UCLA. And it sounds weird now, but in those days, they were trying to find peaceful uses for nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and one of the things that he worked on was the Cajon Pass, where the freeway goes through there now. There was actually a proposal to use nuclear weapons to clear the way to go through Cajon Pass. I can't make this up.
No.
It worked.
Well, fortunately, it never worked. Never came to be. But then he got the job at Riverside and stayed there until he retired. It was 1987, something like that. So Bill had sort of a revelation when he got his first sabbatical leave. He traveled back to places he visited, that he served at during the Second World War. And he said he noticed a huge increase in population the changes in the land that accompanied that. And he could see the future. And he said, one day, you know, Al, I can write another paper. If I'm lucky, 10 people a year will read it. 1 or 2 might use it. But if we can save some land for research and teaching, it'll be there forever. And that's one of the things that heavily swayed me when I came here. So Bill, in his teaching at Riverside, had a number of study sites and places where he'd take his classes, and he just kept seeing those disappear. From development or just some other sort of disturbance. At the same time, there were 2 other new faculty, Ken Norris at Santa Barbara and Mildred Mathias at UCLA. The 3 of them got together and pitched this preposterous idea to the Board of Regents that the population of California is going to change. This is in the early 60s. They could see it. And they said, we need places that do not have public access, places that are set aside strictly for research and teaching. And they managed to sell that idea. So the president of the university signed off on it, and that's how the natural reserve system began. Began with, I think, 6 campus reserves. Deep Canyon was one of the original reserves in the natural reserve system. Today there are 39, probably soon to be 40 units in the natural reserve system.
In California.
In California. We have, 150, 160,000 acres that we either own or have some sort of administrative control over. And I think it's one of the greatest assets the university has. So where else are researchers going to be able to do long-term projects? Here,
I would imagine it's a little harder to sell now than it was back then. Maybe not.
it depends on which way the political climate swings. Also, UC has, I don't think we've spent any money on the actual acquisition of land. It's all been donor-based. One of the constraints with that, of course, is once you have the land, you got to manage it. Mm-hmm. You know, that takes money. So about 15, 20 years ago, the policy on accepting land changed. It had to come with an endowment. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to manage it. So from owning land outright, like we do here, that's led to different models of partnering with Forest Service, partnering with National Park Service. Today we have Sage Hen Creek, which essentially we own the footprint of the buildings. The rest of it's Forest Service land. And that's part of their experimental forest, Forest Service experimental forest. In Anza Borrego, we own 40 acres. We're immediately adjacent to the Anza Borrego Desert State Park. It gives us access to 1 million acres of parkland. Mm-hmm. So it's different business models, if you will, of how we expand our reserves. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, you get me talking.
That wasn't really a question. We were just talking about building a big deal and it went there. That's exactly what we want. That's perfect. Bill came in and out of my life professionally a number of times. When I was still an undergraduate,
remember going to Riverside to hear a seminar. Bill Mayhew. When I got on the Navy and I was thinking about working with zebra-tailed lizards, Preston said, "Hey, you better go out there and talk with Bill." Okay, so I went out and talked with Mayhew. And he got me pointed in the right direction. So, what's yours? So then I went to Wisconsin. Mayhew had worked on reproduction desert lizards. Different aspects of it, more of the physiology and histology of it, and sorts of things. But since I had my lizard colony and I was trying to get them to lay eggs and all that, called Bill up, said, "Bill, Dr. Mayhew, I've got this colony. I'd like to talk to you about it." Turns out I'm taking a cross-country trip on a bus. He said, I'm going to be in Madison. Boom. So he comes by Madison. We talked about it. Bill goes on his way. I finish up. And got the call about, Jan was leaving. Well, Bill was on the interview today.
Mm-hmm.
He had the poor judgment to hire me. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So Bill just kept.
It's the same sine wave as
Yeah.
running through your life.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Okay, so I feel like we're right about the point where we should be talking about French-tailed lizards a little more. So
You got a lot of time.
well, I had you talked about Mark being here. I think maybe we could do another session with you and Mark together, or maybe you and Mark and Dr. Barrows together and talk about French-tailed lizards, sort of a more round table type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but for now,
let me bring in to wrap up, close the circle. Mark Fisher was born a herper. There are herpetologists. I am a herpetologist. That's my professional treatment. But there are some people that are just born with their love for reptiles and amphibians. I mean, it's in their DNA. It's in their blood. Now, those are the guys that every spring they go out and they count frogs by the frog call. And they'll say, they'll look in different counties. It's particularly happens in the East where they have these postage stamp counties. A new record of X frog, and those are herpers. You're just born that way. Mark's one of them. And he went to Cal State Fullerton. We were 15 years apart, roughly, and he had the same undergraduate advisor as I did, Byron Bradstreet. And when I first came here, Mark had just finished his bachelor's and was looking for a summer job. So I hired him on as a facilities guy. And that was 34 years ago. Mark is, he never went back for his master's. We sort of encouraged that in the early years, but it just didn't work out. But he is by far the best field guy I've ever been with. He's an extraordinarily good naturalist. He sees things that he can't possibly see. And he knows things that you just got to stop dead in your tracks and say, Mark, how the hell do you know that? Oh, I read a little bit. And that's just Mark. So I think you can attest to his acumen in the field. He is extraordinary. And I've been very fortunate to have him as a research partner for all these years. So it closes that little circle.
Did he go in and out and still water Shoe Adams plants? Because he his truck going back and forth.
He probably does.
I assume so. I don't know who else would do it if it's not Mark.
Yeah. Mark and Tracy would probably do it too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of friendship, camaraderie between the Adams, us, Mark and Tracy. So, the Adams went to Africa with us.
That's true.
Half a dozen times.
Namibia.
Yeah.
Yes. I'll offline. I'll tell you. I live in the same place, and she recruited me to the board of Friends. So that's a little bit of a relationship there.
I met Sue when she was at Living Desert.
Yes.
She was there 74, 5, and 6, I think. The same with Ruth Lana. I think those are the only two that are left over from that era. That's how that all came about.
So originally there was a really pretty strong relationship as far as research going on at the Living Desert, or near the Living Desert at least, or
It just depended on what the project was. The Living Desert was a far smaller operation. There were fewer people down there. And as I said, my study site was on the south side, and there was never any interference or anything else. And during the summer, some of my lizards would wander into places now that are overrun with people.
right.
Yeah, not at those times. They were interested in research, just facilitating it. They didn't have a real research program.
Right.
And when you're sort of out on the frontier, there was them and there was us, and
Right.
the rest of the world. And if they needed help, we gave it to them. If we needed help, they helped us.
Yeah.
They had tractors and stuff that we didn't have. And, I remember one particular day we went down and tore down a whole series of animal pens. They were really pretty big things, but we helped them.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying through part of our sort of interview series here is trying to get a feel for sort of what the conservation community, how it's sort of evolved over the years.
How did it start? And rumor has it that it started around defending the land that the fringe-toed lizard needs in order to survive.
It was a fairly amorphous bunch of people that were here that had concerns, but they never quite gelled into a cohesive voice, cohesive force for any one particular project. Somebody on your board, Joan Taylor. Joan's been around, and it took a while for the Sierra Club to really focus on the fringe-toed lizard, for instance, or the reserve, Lennon's project. So the fringe-toe was the first big, broad, encompassing issue that was in their backyard that was worth fighting and that had a chance of winning. One of the issues that a lot of organizations have is they try to do too much. They try to save the world. And you're so dispersed and so spread out that you're not focusing on the right way to approach specific problems to get things done. When I came aboard, there was a group that had started, Desert Protective Council. They've been around for 60 years, I think. They had started a foundation, the Coachella Valley Ecological Reserve Foundation. They were not well organized, and they were talking about selling T-shirts to buy lizard habitat. It just, that's an admirable thought, but it just ain't going to work, guys. And so when I had the job interview, Bill Mayhew said, "Oh, and there's this. Well, the lizard. Let me back up. The Coachella Valley fringe-toed lizard was listed in 1989, and then the Endangered Species Act was changed to include an economic analysis of the impact of listing the lizard. So nothing happened. Then in 1982, October, the Endangered Species Act was amended again. And those were the amendments that extended protection of the animal from not just federal land, but to wherever the animal occurred. And that would obviously result in a take of private land, which you can't do. But the way out of that was provided with the amendments. That was the Habitat Conservation Plan. So the lizard was listed 1982, August of 82. I had my job interview, and at the interview, Bill said, there's this little organization, Coachella Valley Ecological Reserve Foundation. Would you be interested in getting involved with that? I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, just answer a few phone calls a week. Well, okay. And then I followed up with the question, now, okay, that's sort of political activism. And I'm all for that. But where is the line between your personal activism and UC policy? And Bill looked me in the eye and said, "Oh, just don't get arrested." That seems to have worked. So I got interested in the lizard, and when I found out about the Endangered Species Act amendments in October, I called the office and talked to Gail Kabetich, who was the lead for California, and I explained my understanding of what the act said, and there was this very delayed, hesitant, yes, you're right. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I'd like to come down and meet with you. So that was how we got Fish and Wildlife Service involved. And we sort of plotted out this strategy of, well, we have to get the cities, we got to get the county, we have to identify where the lizards actually are, those sorts of things. And then there came along a project, Bill Bone's project, was it Desert Falls? I think it's a square mile project out there. And county hearing was coming up. And they have a copy of the letter. I hand wrote a letter, sent it. It just killed the project, stopped it in its tracks. And at that hearing, their attorney, Paul Silver, got up and argued that the board should trust us, meaning me and him, actually, to work this out. And we come back in a few weeks and present a plan. Paul had sense enough to realize that Sunrise Corporation, that project was not their last project. And he advised them that we can fight this battle. We may win this time, may not. But we don't want to fight this battle every time you do a project. Let's solve the problem. Let's not argue about it. Let's solve the problem. And that's how it all happened. And then 2 years later, we had the first habitat conservation plan in the country. And the fallout from that was that it worked. It's the reason your father came to the valley. Yeah. He was the manager of the 1,000 Palms Preserve. Fast forward 10 years, and the West County, they're having no end of endangered species issues over there. And the only people that are making money are the attorneys. And actually, CBAG came to us, came to CAN, and said, we see what's going on. We want to be proactive. We know there are more things here that will be listed. We want a proactive habitat conservation plan. 12 years later, we have one. But it was pulling teeth along the way. But the good thing about that was the groups that opposed us the most with the fringe-tailed lizard are our greatest supporters for the multiple species plan. CVAG came to us. The Building Industry Association came to us. And they argued very strongly at a number of city council meetings that this was the way to do it. It's the way to go. So all that came out of when you answer a few phone calls.
So just for the camera, talk a little bit about like what is a habitat conservation plan? Why is it important? In your own words.
A habitat conservation plan is important because it provides for the existence of a species in perpetuity, theoretically. You ask a biologist, right? That's nonsense. But in theory, that's what it's supposed to do. And the other side of that is that it gives the local governments and the development community assurance. They know what to do. They know how to do it. And they can get on with what they do. You want to drive them crazy? Delay their projects. They got money up. They're paying interest on that. They've got their construction materials lined up. You can't delay them. They don't want to be delayed. I should put it that way. You can delay. So that's the importance of the habitat conservation plan. For species conservation and for community assurance that they know the rules.
Can you explain if there is, I'm not totally clear, a trade-off between, yes, these are the lands where you can build, and no, these are the lands where you can't build because we're preserving the habitat. Is that really a trade-off, or is that a kind of just a demarcation of what, making it clear? Is there some kind of...
There are trade-offs.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you have a really good idea of what the habitat requirements are for whatever the species is. You're not. Okay. You also have to have an idea with the fringe-tailed lizard in particular, what the physical processes are that maintain the habitat. If you just take a block of land here and cut it off from everything else, you're going to lose it all.
Yeah.
So you also know that development is going to occur sort of piecemeal initially, then it's filling in.
Yeah.
And if you know you have development on three sides of this piece that's left here, all those edge effects and all are going to have a long-term impact. You can trade that. Those are the kinds of trade-offs that you do. You want, and it's a guess. With fringe-tailed lizard, I think we guessed right. But it was by no means assured. Those were just guesses. Paul told me something one day that I knew, and he knew. It's one of the reasons we got along. He said, Al, the developers can lose time and time and time again. You can only lose once. If you get greedy and lose, you've lost it all. There's an art form to finding that line
Hmm.
and hoping it works. We were successful.
Mhm.